happy to know we are all happy to notice. I hope, can you all see the trend at the front? What is interesting about my panel? The interesting thing is men are talking about gender. So that's gender perspectives too. You're all men. We are missing one lady. When she comes, we shall invite her. Maybe I will ask the Dr. Peace Musimenta to help me contact my fifth panelist who will represent the females. Okay, so we are going to begin our panel, and each of you is going to have close to 10 to 12 minutes to present so as to give chance to people to ask questions. And I imagine the questions are going to be many because mine is a panel of men talking about gender. So it's not the usual, it's the usual women talking about gender. So we are going to go in this order. Incidentally, you have sat in the same order. I'll begin with Dr. Chindi, and you'll each have your 10 to 12 minutes. And please keep time. I don't know who is keeping time. We had Eric Lubega with us. Eric, I know, is backstopping the entire conference, but I don't know whether we can use this space to also backstop us here, since you're in our space. So each one is supposed to have 10 to 12 minutes. Please let us know where they have reached. So over to you, Fred. Please start.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Is it okay if I present from here or I go and stand? Okay. I'm presenting about women and gender studies, activism, and contribution to gender equality in Uganda. This paper is a product of a research that is being conducted by Professor Grace Vantevia and myself, Kendi Fred, and is funded by Andrew Mellon under the CHOOSE project. So in this paper, we are interested in finding out what, besides the School of Women and Gender Studies teaching and doing teaching, publishing, conducting research, what has it done out there in the public in terms of activism, helping the women's movement in Uganda and policymakers. So I will begin by giving an introduction. We realized that women's studies emerged from a political and social movement outside the walls of the university. So unlike other disciplines, the women's studies started outside the walls of the university. It was noted that women who are agitating for the program Women's Studies were fed up with discrimination and the male-dominated nature of university structures. They demanded that the program on women's studies be introduced. So we noticed that because the discipline was born out of activism outside the university walls, it meant that the program on women's studies started with a dual mandate, or with two purposes. One was to introduce, institutionalize, and grow the women's studies as an academic discipline in the university. Now, the second was that this academic discipline was also meant to serve the women's movement by providing a theoretical and conceptual basis for women's or feminist movement, agenda, and policymakers' practices. So meaning that this second goal was generally in conformity with university requirement of outreach program. So the women's studies wanted to have a more direct, visible influence on women's movement, agenda, and policymaking outside the university. So within Makerere University, the School of Women and Gender Studies also started within the same context. But we noticed that whereas in the academia here at Makerere University, the school has done significant achievement in terms of teaching, research, and publication. The key question which this paper presents is, to what extent has the school fulfilled its second mandate of supporting the women's movement agenda and policy making? So methodologically, This study was used qualitative methods of data collection, analysis, and interpretation. We collected data from about 12 key informants through in-depth interview. These constituted some staff within the School of Women and Gender Studies, and some of the founders of the school, and some participants from the civil society organization. And if you look around literature generally, we realize that university work was limited to only teaching, research, and services within the university campus. University professors were seen as simply individuals confined to the ivory towers, engaged only in academic work, and any work that was done outside the university was seen as unscholarly. But around 1862 and 1890, 1914, there were acts in the US that were passed that tried to connect the university to the community, whereby they had to translate scientific research into actual practice within the community. So it is from around that time that university adopted the whole idea of community outreach. And it's within the same context that women's studies program started, that it started outside the university hall, but at the same time, although it came to the university as a program, it had to go back and connect with women activism out there. So what is the situation of outreach, for example, within Makerere University? We realize that if you look at Makerere University Strategic Plan 2020/30, under Goal 4, where it is noted as an engaged university with enhanced partnership with the industry, the community, and international institutions. One of the objective within that goal is to enhance community outreach programs and revitalize university open days. So if that is one of the objectives, how does Makerere define outreach, community outreach? It characterizes it in the following manner: extension and outreach function as an interface between research and training that would make a university relevant to societal needs or national development. Extension and outreach comprise of internship, consultancy, action research, and short-term, non-academic training programs to a wide range of clients. Provide feedback for adaptation of curricula, learning approaches, and research methodologies for relevance. And it is also a space for joint learning and change for students, academic staff, community, university, and partners. So it also highlights the critical areas of training, research, and development. So what does that mean when they talk about those as some of the characteristics of outreach? It means that outreach programs involve public lectures, field trips, internship by students, consultants work, public dissemination of research findings, community-based participatory research, professional workshop, etc. Now, that is how our university characterizes outreach. Now, what has been the role of the School of Women and Gender Studies in this outreach? Remember, as I said, that besides teaching the program in the university, it's also meant to connect with the community or the women's movement and policymakers. Now, starting in that context, the school at the beginning, the academic staff participated in a number of activities. One of them is that many served as committee members on various government ministries, Ministry of Health, Gender, Ministry of Education. Others served as body chairs, members of civil society organizations, offering short evening courses, research and consultancy for civil society organizations. So that's how actively the school was at the beginning. But what happened after that, when the founders of the school became senior and overburdened with work? Initially, this partnership was so strong, but over time, it started to wane. In other words, to kind of get slower in terms of relationship, collaboration. As one academician said that the school started to focus on her mandate of teaching and research as required by the university, while activism in the public was left to women in the civil society and a few female politicians. In line with the university human resource policy, new academic recruits were expected to have the relevant qualification, apply for research grants, publish in reputable journals, create impact, and be accountable for their intellectual productivity. This took away time to engage in activism and other activities outside academia. Then on the side of the civil society, many of the founding members joined politics where they felt an impact in terms of policies on women and gender studies could be influenced. The young generation that was left behind to manage the organization were not oriented to the relationship between activism and academia. This had a rather negative effect on fulfilling one of the objectives of the relationship between women activists and academia. Then another respondent noted that over time, the collaboration with the women's civil society organization faded. This could partly be explained by the fact that now a lot of people have been trained in gender, and they feel that that active collaboration where they needed the school to as technical people to help them on the activities now kind of gradually stopped because now many of them are trained in gender. Now, what is the current status? That despite that relationship weakening between civil society and the women's movement policymakers, still there are some people who are actively engaged with some of these organizations as board members, dealing in consultancy, student internship, seminar debates. So it is still there. But still, because this relationship is not as strong as it is used to be, it means that something along the way happened. As one respondent noted that some of these civil society organizations have been co-opted by government. So kind of affects the relationship. Another one noted that because there was a change in the curriculum from women as a category of analysis to gender and development, so people are more into development than more on women's issues. The others claim that this relationship has been affected by events such as politics, competition, resources, to the extent that certain activities where this department used to work in concert with the civil society organization, now people work independently. For example, when it comes to 16 days of activism, every women's organization celebrates independent of each other. You find the school organizes its own activities. Oxford, for example, organizes their own, yet in reality we are supposed to work together, but this no longer happens. So this scenario creates a situation of competition and also a lack of consensus and what binds us together on what the women's agenda should be. So to conclude, what is the way forward? We suggest that the school needs to rekindle their second mandate by calling upon all civil society organizations that were active in the establishment of the school to come together and reminisce on the collaborations and forge stronger relationships. Also, annual conferences, seminars between the school and the women's movement through the coalition of all CSOs dealing with women's rights needs to be held to reflect on the achievement of their collaboration and set new agendas for the years ahead. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much, Fred. That's Fred. He's a lecturer in the School of Women and Gender Studies. We are doing badly for time, so we are going to go straight to Muhammad Tukur. Just tell us your name, and I think you're a Gada Henkel scholar. Which year are you in? Oh, you have a PowerPoint? Okay. So just move on and start the PowerPoint. So we are going to be very strict with time. The members of the next session are already in the room. So.
Okay, thank you. Our protocols duly observed. My name is Mubarak Tukur, a PhD student in the Department of History, Archaeology, and Heritage Studies. My topic of research is women and peace building on the Mambila Plateau in northern Nigeria. This is part of my PhD research. Mambila Plateau is a region in northern Nigeria, in northeastern part of Nigeria, which is bordered with Cameroon, and it's a crisis or contestation between the tribes that were living in that place, partly because of the dominance of Mambila as a tribe itself, the struggle for farmland, and the other way around, the Fulani, whom we call them maybe the pastoralists, those who have cattle for looking for a grazing land. So the conflict compelled women to initiate peace-building activities. The major tribes that live on this mountain are Pulbe, the Kaka, Mambila, Fanso, and Kambu. And all of them have a kind of history of migration. Most of them, they connected their history from the Middle East, but studies have shown that most of them have a kind of lineage in Cameroon Republic. So I will take you a little bit back. After the Second World War, the German territories were balkanized. So this territory is under German territory, under the trustee leadership of the United Nations. So after the 1961 plebiscite, whether they should choose between Nigeria or to live in Cameroon. So the balkanization of these tribes made some of the relatives to stay in Cameroon and others stay in the part of Nigeria. So they live like in 1,800 meters above the sea level. So they were on the top of the mountain. So the contestation here is the Mambila tribe are trying to say that they are the original inhabitants of the land, which the Fulani here, you can see them, are contesting that they are also indigenous in that particular land. One of the major economic activities for them there is the cultivation of tea leaves. However, the crisis of 2002 was the major catalyst that brought the Mambila crisis into limelight nationally. It was a crisis whereby the Mambila tribes, who were the farmers, accusing the Fulani, who were the herders, of encroachment into their farmland, destruction of their crops, and if they try to ask the reason why their farmland were being destroyed, then the Fulanis, who were having the dominance in terms of the economy, then they used to bribe the judges and do away with the case. Then in 2017 also, there is another massive crisis, which also resulted into displacement of more than 20,000 people, and a lot of lives were being displaced. Here again, the Mambila tribe tried to also attack the Fulanis on the same issue of farmland destruction. So in retaliation, the Mambilas tried to kill the cows, the slaughter most of them, which at long last forced these women to think of initiating a peace-building approach. The first approach was under the United Nations, under the GZ Refugee Services, which engaged all the tribes in the mountain, trying to engage youth in peace-building activities, because most of the youth were used in unleashing this kind of violence. Then they formed the reconciliatory aspect of it, whereby the issue of forgiveness was brought into limelight. Then there is another important aspect of it, which was the prayer group. The women also established a kind of vigil prayers, which they pray for peace to reign in the mountains. And
thank you, Professor, for that introduction. As he projects the slides, maybe I might speak briefly about the background to the topic. Women were given a chair. Instead of sitting on it, they ended up standing on it. It is grounded in a PhD topic which looks at men's involvement in achieving gender equality in Rwanda. And of course, the background to that PhD project shows the journey through which Rwanda has gone in terms of empowering women. And of course, broadly, globally, in the past 40 years, of course, we've had interventions from gender and development interventions from women in development, women and development. So Rwanda was peaking on those interventions. You know, the UN decades for gender, for women. So, but at that global level, there has been a realization that one of the shortcomings of many gender and development projects is that there has been lack of engagement with men. So my PhD project, and of course, I will show you how I come to this topic, this paper, which is derived from my PhD project. So men have been regarded as the problem in these interventions of gender and development. So I picked Rwanda as a unique case study because, you know, Rwanda has had progressive policies and laws for involving women. We well know that Rwanda has a high women parliamentary representation in the whole world. And of course, it has done a lot in empowering women and gender relations. But in this study, in this paper, and broadly in my PhD topic, I acknowledge that amid these efforts of women empowerment in Rwanda, there is a problem of men's exclusion from gender equality discussions and strategies and interventions. And of course, scholars also have pointed out this. These are not just my statements. So the research problem, I'm not looking at a social problem per se, but also a research problem. Do we have adequate research that builds on that fact that men are not included? Because as we move on, you realize that men have resisted these gender interventions in Rwanda, these policies. So despite these commendable efforts to empower women and achieve gender equality in Rwanda, there is also a misunderstanding of gender equality among some Rwandan men and women. Because as I've been collecting data in Rwanda, and of course one of the questions was, how do you understand gender? And of course, part of the voices of these respondents will come out as I highlight them. But the major research question that motivated this paper when I was submitting in my abstract this conference is that what are men's perceptions, lived experiences, and how are they involved in achieving gender equality policies and laws in Rwanda? But before going into the voices of these respondents who are men, maybe I should speak briefly about the theoretical framework that informs this paper. One of the researchers who is based in South Africa, Professor Ratere, who is at the University of Stellenbosch, talks about critical men and masculinities studies and talks about how men change. There is a quotation, but I try to summarize to see what I can pick in order to inform my study, that men change how they practice being men as their socioeconomic conditions and discursive worlds change. Consequently, when men's worlds change, of course, within the gender relations framework and the gender order, which has also been theorized by scholars widely from the global south, consequently, when women's lives change, such as when they assume positions of decision-making in society and construction of femininities, undergo transformation, men and masculinities are likely to come under pressure to also transform. But also in the theoretical framework, I also was looking at hegemonic masculinities, where within the broader gender relations, there is, of course, the problem of patriarchal power, where men might rule over women and children. So research has mainly focused on hegemonic masculinities. But there is an interesting dimension which talks about hegemonic femininities, because we've seen that as changes take place within gender relations, not only do we have this resistance from men in the form of hegemonic masculinities, but also hegemonic femininities. So in the transformation in policies, for instance, in the context of Rwanda, the introduction of these policies have also brought about hegemonic femininities. Not to say that it was intended, but of course, women have also had to react. So what are some of what are men saying? Briefly, the methodology, I was trying to navigate this discursive field of gender relations, of course, based on a research approach, a qualitative study approach, and of course, looking at Rwanda as a case study. So, some of the voices from men say that ever since gender equality was introduced, both men and women are always having issues. Both argue that they have equal rights, and once a woman or wife tries to stand his ground, the husband feels threatened. I'll pick some of the quotes. I won't read them all, but one of them is that where a man was speaking in a focus group discussion, was saying that when you are newly wedded, the woman or wives obey their husbands, but after getting children, they start disobeying their husbands, relating it to gender equality. These conflicts are the source of stress and depression, suicides in homes, and domestic murders. There should be a department to defend men so that they could know where they can go to get their issues resolved. Of course, that is what is coming from the data collected. And of course, part of my correction also, data collection also comes from key informants, because I was also at the Ministry of Gender, and of course they were telling me that they have a men-engaged approach which has been designed to deal with these issues of men that are coming up. So in this study, I tried to see how these discourses by men also can be brought into the broader scholarly discussion about what gender equality is. And in conclusion, in the Rwandan context, there is a realization that women empowerment and gender equality policy interventions have created opportunities for equal rights and opportunities for women, but over time, it has also created spaces within which hegemonic femininities are emerging. So, the task ahead is one of continuously mobilizing intersectional formulations of how to understand how these hegemonic masculinities are coexisting with hegemonic femininities. So there is need for a more robust conceptual and theoretical frameworks that move beyond understanding what men are, how they behave through hegemonic masculinities, but also to examine the role of women in the reproduction of domination in gender relations, and how that has implications for the transformation of gender relations within the Rwandan context, and of course achieving the national gender policy for transforming these gender relations. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe I should also have added that Simon was a lecturer, a senior lecturer in the Center for Gender Studies at University of Rwanda for a long time. That's where I first met him. So that gives insights in why his study is situated in Rwanda. So next we are going to have Dr. David Timber, who is a former Miser Scholar, graduate of 2021. So come and give us your topic. Are you presenting from there? Yes, so give us more of where you are, more introduction about yourself, and we proceed.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Greetings from the Center for African Studies at Uganda University, where I'm listening to people like Sarah. Process. is thought out from a spatial vantage point and a temporal vantage point. So while at stake is the humanities as a whole, which is being trampled upon, the geography and the time necessitate us to really come back into the context and see how far this noble struggle for gender justice can be differently articulated, given that we have different vantage points of time and vantage point of geography. So what am I doing in this paper? I want to thrust back two notions into the gender analysis and the gender discourse for justice. One is, can we bring history back in, and not in an instrumentalist fashion that once upon a time we were great and this is how we were and our women were so beautiful and powerful, and takes a romanticization and a essentialization of a past, a very particular past of heroines and queen mothers and princesses, and that is not what I mean by bringing history back in. I just mean we need to bring history back in with all the controversies, with all its richness and taboos, with all its foreclosures, but also with its openings. Can we bring history back in the gender analysis in ways that help us understand how much we have traveled in the struggle and how much things have remained the same while others have changed? The second point which I want to make in this presentation is, can we bring politics back into the gender analysis? Because most of the literature which I reviewed seems to be talking about power. Gender relations is all about power, but power in a way that is extremely depoliticizing. And we see the political only when we talk about states institutions. The political to mean that can we speak to the states in terms of the executive branch of government. But the political really what I want to bring in is the political where Ibn Khaldun, medieval Berber philosopher, tells us whatever is a product of choice is political field. So political in the sense that choice can be made, and it is not a fait accompli we are facing. There are ways, there are always alternatives, much as the mainstream can be so much main and very overshadowing and overpowering. Can we summon alternative thinking which are based on agency which is historically constructed, but also a result of different imaginations. Some of the sources can be sociological, it can be cultural, can be exposure, all that which constitute raw material for choice is what I mean by the political. And so what does it mean to bring the political and the historical in the gender analysis for gender justice? Is what really concerns me. So 3 things before I shut up. One, my first point in bringing the history back in tells me that not all female in most of our pre-colonial society were women. And because in the pre-colonial, particularly my reading of the pre-colonial society, not all female were women, that is a very important moment of rupture in terms of how we think of how we have become. My language has gotten a particular term, which I think is the residue of historical imagination. The way we call anchors in my mother tongue, the anchor is called nyokolume. Nyokolume, that's anchor. It speaks volume about, and I'm a political historian, so if you ask historical linguists, they can tell you that behind nyokolume there is an entire, nyokolume literally speaking means my mother who is male. It is the same, if you look at Runjakitara, for example. You know, Runjakitara has this particular word for those people, the English people call auntie. The English call them auntie, and auntie is a very emptying concept, but ours was a very linguistically and sociologically endowed. The Runjakitara people call the person the British call auntie Nshe Kazi. Nshe Kazi. If you think about that for a moment, Shenkazi, literally speaking, it means my father who is female. My father is female. So Shenkazis will go and attend the meeting about the dowry negotiation together with all the male. That's where Shenkazi belong. They belong to the council of the male. These are just biologically appearing the female body, but they are share in and of themselves through and through. Nyokolumes, on the other hand, my mother who is male, means we have this particular mother of mine who just happened to be male. So they will be clustered together with all the women in the one group, expecting and thinking through the family from a women point. So, interestingly, that is how far we've come. We've come to the point where, I mean, pre-colonially speaking, if we really pay a very particular, attentive reading of our pre-colonial societies, we realize that there is a very interesting conceptual difference and politically implied meaning of what to be a female, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be male, and what it means to be men. There was no equating whatsoever. Not all female were ipso facto women, and not all male were ipso facto. The best summation of this has been documented by our very prolific Nigerian scholar, Ife Amadume. And the title of her book is telling. She writes, male daughters and female husbands. It sums up the whole argument. Please go and read at your earliest convenience that book. The second point I want to make is about how, with all the richness of just imagine conceptually how hard it is to imagine male daughters and female husbands. And it worked, it glued us together as a society for not just decades, not just, but for centuries. And then we travel up until white folks show up on our shores of the African continent, and they come particularly from a particular moment of Victorian Britain and post-Enlightenment France and Renaissance Italy, and they all come the century of Enlightenment, which was darkening for the continent. And all of a sudden, they do one thing on this continent, which is making males, all males becoming men, and all female becoming women. And this is the particular moment I call the colonial turning of the tables. All of a sudden, every single male becomes man, and every single female becomes woman. And this is drastically, diametrically opposed to the ways of living and of being as we knew them prior to colonial moments. The best summation of this argument is by a Nigerian scholar, this time from the Yoruba society, Oyeyirinke Oyenyimi. She writes The Invention of Women, 10 years after Ife Amadume has written Male Daughters and Female Husbands. Oyenyimi is telling about how women were created as a conceptual and political category to depoliticize their agency and corner them, box them into one subjective class called those at the receiving end of the power spectrum. The women is an invention, according to Oyenyimi. And then we see eventually the politics of biologizing the body and reading the political through biology. That was not our case in the pre-colonial time. And we are panobited into something we call now heteronormativity. The world is cast into black and white. We're back into the Garden of Eden proper. There should be an Adam and an Eve. And anything else in between has been flattened out. We are in Genesis 1:12 par excellence. This is not the African sociology which were existing before. The post-colonial time comes, decolonization, which is political movement, comes, and it does one thing. It replaces the European bourgeoisie with nationalist African bourgeoisie, and it does one thing excellently: policing, and this is my third and last point, policing gender heteronormativity. That the new way of life is, we have been told now that male are women, all the males are supposed to be men, and all the females are supposed to be women, and nothing in between. And now there's a post-colonial state which is going to police heteronormativity as a political way of belonging to the states. Hence, queerness, which has been very much part and parcel of us, And anything in between, anything between being male for man and female for man, were all thrust into under the carpet. And now we are having a state that watches over our gender and sexual heteronormativity as not just a way of existing, but the way outside of which there is no any other conceptual ways of articulating our being. And here we are in the post-colonial moment. They call it post-colonial. I would love to call it post-independence, because it has been, we've never been decolonial at anything if you talk about gender justice. And my point is, at stake is, how do we face up the discourse on queerness? How do we face up the discourse on male daughters and female husbands? And what's the place of those who refuse the gender performativity of heteronormous beings? Those will be non-conforming gender identities. And this has rode its ugly head through the Anti-Homosexuality Act. We have seen the Anti-Pornography Act. We have seen the Anti-Whatever Act. All that is a struggle still for gender justice. And unless we have this background to the historical and we understand the political and the gender, we are having a very cosmetic and plastic struggle against queerness. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, David, for that very powerful conceptual things. I've been looking at all the gender scholars in the room, and they were shaking their heads, and it's good to see Oyomi reborn in Uganda. Members, we have not more than 20 minutes to ask our questions. So can we see those who are interested in asking? You want to ask? Even the panelists, are they allowed to ask? Okay, so we have quite a number of questions, and we are going to request Mr. Lubega to help us. So please, every hand, you mention your name, ask the question, and tell us who you're directing the question to. We shall collect all the questions and get the answers once, because the next panel is ready to take over the space. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Sabit Bruno. So my question goes to Dr. Kindfred. Dr. Kind, you have talked about the linkages between the School of Women and gender with the civil society in preaching the gospel of gender activism to the public. And my question goes like this. How best have you followed up the applicability of your teachings at the School of Women and Gender Studies in the society as far as gender activism is concerned? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much, and all the presenters for the exciting ideas that you have shared with us. I was really intrigued by Simon's presentation around this question of male engagement, and also what he said about women being given a stool and then standing on it. However, more importantly, I'm more interested in the question, you actually quoted Ratere, saying that when men's lives change, they change. Now, I'm intrigued by that, especially given that we are talking about male engagement and their involvement in a number of, problematic social issues such as violence or gender-based violence. And I'm just wondering, should we be just celebrating the fact that individual men, because their lives have changed, then they try to behave in such a way that they will not be violent, rather than focusing on the totality of the conditions? Because individuals can change, but we don't see the conditions of women changing in total. But I might claim that I'm a good man, I don't beat my wife, and you might say the same, and so on. But when we stand out of that and look at what is happening everywhere, we still get problems. We still get horrible acts by men. Shouldn't we be moving beyond this idea of we just need male allies and go into the spaces, the men's spaces, and force the conversation there? Focus on the social structures, focus on the social norms, because those are the things that keep these behaviors alive, rather than just individual men changing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, panelists. I'm also intrigued by Asasira's presentation, and when he talks about hegemonic femininities, I wanted to know how these hegemonic femininities relate to women being given a chair and standing on it. And secondly, I am inquisitive to know, what does it mean to be given a chair and you stand on it? This needs to come out. Thank you.
I think, Grace Bantevia Chomwendo, Women and Gender Studies. Thank you so much for this exciting panel. I was interested in how the women are standing on the chair. I think my colleague has already asked it. And I was also, interested in the whole concept of they were given the chair, and who is it that who gave the chair? Then I'm also interested in how you have interpreted is it Ishwenkuru? Nyokoromi, how you turned it to be male, and the way you are interpreting the Nyokoromi, Ishwenkazi, and you are equivalent. You're making them equivalent to the females, correct? Yeah. So I'm really keenly interested in that. Thank you.
I'm Patrick Mwase from the School of Psychology. My question goes to Simon. You have talked about the emergence of hegemonic femininities. How has this emergence, or how is it counterproductive to realizing the gender equality policies within those women in Rwanda? And then to, I can't recall his name, but the question is, how you talked about the female husbands and the male wives, something of that kind.
Male daughters.
Male daughters. You know, how does it really make us really appreciate the aspect of gender within the historical perspective of gender formation? Thank you.
Mr. Lubega, there are some two hands in the middle there. Yes, please, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Alaper John Yohana from School of Economics. Then my question goes to Simon. You talked about women getting children, even jobs. Mostly even me, the things in our communities, the other side of Karamoja, I always see this issue as a big threat. Because sometimes you find that the lady has gotten children, even a job. Then after that, she starts misbehaving in their families and so on. Then my question is, what should we then do to overcome such a problem? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Someone else had a hand there, the one in the black coat. It was asked. Yeah. Okay, do we have any more questions? Yes, there are two questions on this side. They are behind this beside the black pillar. You must have gone to the gym this morning. If not, we shall recommend that the conference organizer gives the gym fees for those who participated in the organization. They've worked very hard. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you so much. My name is Twekambe Kabaruli. My question goes to Dr. Asasura Simon. He says he tackled the topic, women were given a chair, instead of sitting on it, they are standing on it. A case study he carried in Rwanda. You realize that globally, Uganda inclusive, they are saying that however much there is women empowerment and gender emancipation of women, they have not yet reached to a level at least of 50-50, or at least, let us say, 40%. That is as per the research. So how comes that in Rwanda we are seeing a reverse, and what has the government so far done? Should we say that the Ministry of Gender in Rwanda hasn't realized this? What interventions made in Rwanda to make sure that women are not misusing the chair they were given? I don't know by who. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's someone behind you in a maroon shirt.
Yes, good morning. My name is Shapson. My question goes to Fred, I think Dr. Fred Kindi. So my issue is that I think in perspective of Uganda, in terms of Uganda, the government has worked hard to promote equality, gender equality, women empowerment, but I think the failure for all that is not the problem with the men or anyone else. I think specifically it's for the women, because even if you have to see like university, they've encouraged a lot of female students to participate in all the academic activities and all. Even if you have to check the population, women I think so far surpass the male. But my issue is now I think you have to concentrate more on the ladies themselves. I think they try to let themselves down. Because if you are to try to carry out a survey, ask these students, female students, after their studies, you ask them what next now. All of them will tell you, now I want to get married, give birth. Now you ask yourself, why did you study? Your degree was to get a man? Or? So I think the concentration should now focus on the ladies themselves. You can try to teach them, educate them, because basically we're not the men are not the ones who are faulting them. Most of these women, even if you are to ask now, even especially my sisters, you'll ask them after their studies, they will start thinking of how they're going to give birth and get men. Now you wonder, all his studying was for what? Instead of thinking like how men now, I'm going to go and get a job, work, do what? I think the issue now is, ladies, you have to talk to yourselves more and teach them that they can live either lonely or...
Okay, thank you.
Then also the activists, I've tried to see most of the activists, the feminists, you realize that most of them are in their either their early 40s, late 40s. I don't know whether they've, after participating in family issues, they try to fight for their female. I don't know whether they started earlier when they are still...
Dr. Fred has gotten that point. So we are going to have the next person. I think after that, the mic will return and people will answer the questions. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. To the last presenter, my name is Kennedy, formerly from the School of Psychology. In your presentation, you made a very interesting statement here. You did say that not all females, if I quoted you, you said, not all females during the pre-colonial times were women. How does this statement resonate today and in the present times? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mubarak, you had a question for a panelist? You said you wanted to ask a question, yes.
Okay, mine is to Freight and to the last presenter. that in your topic, I didn't see you mentioning about discussing the establishment of gender school in Makerere, but you say in Uganda, but you end up discussing about the School of Women and Gender here. So generally, what is the overall impact of the School of Gender and Women Studies to the practitioners, to the policymakers? Then lastly, I want you to state the issue, Doctor, I want you to, David, I want you to state the issue of religion and culture within your discourse. How can you place that issue there? Religion and culture, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, and since the mic came here for us also to ask questions, I'm going to ask a question to Mubarak. And we want you to stretch the issue of women's activities and peace building into politics. Because most of the activities you mentioned about women and maybe why they are not seen, I mean, the things you did, it was true about women contributing to peace, the prayers and the movements they're doing. My question is, why aren't they captured amongst the political, the usual peace-building activities in that particular plateau area? Could it be that women things are not being politicized, or that those who focus on peace-building initiatives are only looking at the political peace-building initiatives and not the grassroots kind of peace-building initiatives? Thank you. So we are going to begin our answering from this side. I know, Asasura, you have many more questions, but we are trying to summarize these in 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I will begin.
We have been guided that we are only left with 5 minutes, so let's try to see if we can fit within that.
Okay, I will start with his question. This paper I was presenting about was about how women and gender studies participate in activism, because initially it had that role as well, and how is it happening now. But talking about the history of the school, how it came about and its role to the practitioners, the book that was launched, I think it's that one. Yeah, there is an article that we wrote, which talks about that. Actually, it's page 542, something. It explains that, everything in details. Yeah. Then one of the gentlemen talked about ladies are a problem themselves. When you look around, there are so many ladies in the universities, blah, blah. Now, if you're within Makerere University, you may think that there are so many females. But I always ask most of the students that reflect back where you started in P1. How many of you have come to universities or institutions of higher learning? You'll find that out of there are maybe 50 females that fellow females they studied with, you may find that only 3 or 5 have made it to institution of higher learning. So the picture you have here is a kind of misguides you to think that there are more. Actually, there are few. In any case, we need more. Otherwise, that one, it's a miss whatever. Then ladies want to be a problem wanting to marry. I think you need to understand the culture environment where most of these ladies are coming from. That despite the fact that we've taught gender and other disciplines to try to transform their mind, but the culture environment where they come from is still strong into the patriarchal setting, so it keeps on pulling them back. But there are those who try to go beyond and make it in life.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tukur.
What I can see is that there are 2 issues here. Religion and culture still play important role in northern Nigeria, but despite the conservative nature of the region, we still have few women participating into the politics, and by engaging into that politics, then the peace-building aspect now rose up. But actually, they were participating in an informal aspect, not formally recognized, because of that heavy patriarchal aspect of culture and religion. Besides, religion didn't prevent them from participating actively into peace building, but a kind of manipulative aspect used to prevent them into such activities. But now we still have some of them who are trying to fight that patriarchal aspect. So these are the two issues that are becoming so problematic into the region.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Asasira, I think you have 1 minute.
Thank you. And for the interesting questions, which partly I expected because of the way I phrased my topic. I think it was strategic in a way also to attract, to provoke, and having said that, I also want to mention that that is not my statement. This is part of the data that is coming out from my PhD work. Of course, I won't mention the particular person and position, but this is from a government institution, an institution that is supposed to monitor gender, and she mentioned that statement, that it is what men are saying. So, me as a student of gender studies, as a PhD student, it is my role to get this statement, which is in form of data, to use the theoretical framework, to use the theoretical lens, and interpret it. Because I'm talking about where in my study I wasn't using a discursive analysis, but when I was answering to this conference, the paper I had to look at, I had to interrogate issues of power, looking at how scholars even outside Africa have discussed power. Hegemony. Foucault, a French postmodernist, talks about the knowledge versus power, that discourse. So, to me, I've put out this topic for me to give me the license to apply the theoretical framework to interrogate it. And of course, someone is asking, how is this situation of women being counterproductive in the whole struggle? This is not really a commissioned research project, a consultancy to come up with solutions per se, but really to navigate the knowledge that is coming out of gender relations, out of the outcomes of putting up a policy in Rwanda since 2010, which actually, because now when I was doing this study, that is the time when they were preparing to host CHOGM. And at that point, one of the commissioners in the Ministry of Gender was saying, we are working on, yes, we are well known for women empowerment, but also we've had issues to do with men. Men should also be brought on board, and therefore we are coming up with a men engaged strategy. I believe now it has been put in place. I attended one of the validation workshops for consultants who developed that policy. But also to answer Professor Chikoma's concern is that in Rwanda, actually, I think they are a step ahead more than other countries in terms of engaging men, because they have the Rwanda Men Resource Center, which has a couples curriculum. Because part of my data also interviews couples who have gone under that curriculum. Of course, I believe I'll have an opportunity to share some of the literature. And Dr. Peace and Professor, of course, you asked about the topic, but she specifically asked about the issue of hegemonic femininities. I come to it, of course, through reading literature. And of course, like I said, I'm using it as a theoretical lens to understand some of the data that is coming out. I didn't quite get where the question that he posed. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry, our time is fast spent, but David, please.
And I'm the one standing between you and the next session.
Yeah.
After these 4 questions. Let me say 4 sentences, then I will shut up. Thank you for your insistence, Professor Chomuhendo. You see, Nyokolume speaks volume about, on the one hand, roles assigned to a different biological being and the performance of the biological beings to the role. So when we say the mother, my mother who is male, is my mother who is male. Victorian gender imagination has no such a space to think of that being. And how a mother who is male can be part and parcel of those female who are going to discuss my dowry when I'm being married. So, nyokolume. It's a very, very interesting way of thinking gender, but also doing gender. When they say shenkazi, my father, and this is the father, forget about the biology you are seeing, is my father who happened to be female. So it is not the female who happened to be my father. It is first the emphasis, the stress, the underscoring is, I'm going to deal with this Sarah as my father. It just happened to be Sarah eventually. And that is fundamentally, telling, because where we are now is, I first look at Sarah and be like, hey, she's Sarah. Okay. The way I'll approach her, the way I'll deal with her, I'll be like, okay, she's part of those women. But in my culture, she's the shenkazi. And then I'll be like, how are you, Sebo? The person who gave a keynote on Tuesday, think here, who came to us, has actually told us that Kabaka ship as an institution, and the Kabaka as a title, this is our very own Beatrice Nakanyike Musisi, has told us that Kabaka as a term, historically, is gender neutral. It is a term ascribed historically to the sister of whom we call now king, the mother of that king, and the king himself. They all address as Kabaka. How by 19th century we start seeing Kabaka and equating it to male is a particular product of colonial imagination of Victorian British gender understandings. And so my last point, and I think this is the question that has come in many different forms, how does male daughters, female husbands make sense? How should we think of it today? And I think Mubarak is also asking about religion and culture. Can we bring it back into the analysis? What I'm saying should be brought to the analysis is, can we de-biologize gender? Can we de-biologize gender and then repoliticize it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our time is fast spent, but if there's anything, first of all, a round of applause to my panel. It has been a very interesting panel of men discussing gender studies. And I think there are a few things we can take from here. What they have done is just tickle on the top. They're introducing a discussion on gender studies. And they have invited us to interrogate gender, to perceive it as something which is changing. It's not the usual, which is fixed, men here, female here. We have been invited to interrogate gender with regard to the roles, history, the language, the linguistics. Professor Bantevia didn't know that behind these words, the Shenkaza and Nyokolume, there's a whole script behind it. But lastly, we've been asked to debiologize and repoliticize. But just one thing that someone said, you know, for us to educate women does not mean we curtail their desires for women, for children and husbands. I think that's not what we're about. The issue is, can the workplace accommodate women with their wombs? And the wombs bear babies. So we are not going to problematize gender scholars who are desiring babies. We are going to problematize the workspace that does not accept that women come with babies and husbands and domestic roles. That's what gender mainstreaming in the public sphere is all about. Thank you very much. I'm going to invite my panel to step forward a bit and we take a picture and then we transition to the next panel. Thank you.